Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptic Zone, episode number 326 for the 17th of January 2015. I nearly said 2014. 2015. Richard Saunders here with you from Sydney, Australia, which I think just melted off the map. Oh, wow. 36 in the city today, I think. I was downtown, as it happened, downtown Sydney today doing some work in a business suit. But I'm back home now to do the Skeptic Zone. Coming up on this week's show, we're going to kick off with the Raw Skeptic, Heidi Robertson. And I am delighted to say, Heidi is officially our new reporter on the Skeptic Zone. Welcome aboard, Heidi. So far, unofficially, you've been giving us some great reports. And what a report we have this week from Heidi. She visited what we call a mind-body wallet or a woo fest or alternative fest. Call it what you want. Up in Bangalow, right up in northern New South Wales, the heartland of the anti-vaxxers. And what an interesting report it is. Heidi describes what she finds at this festival, and then she's very courageous. She actually stands up for science. You'll hear all about it coming up with the Raw Skeptic Report. And well done, Heidi. There's a lot of personal stuff in there, Heidi. Wow, you've really sort of laying yourself out there, all in the name of science. Following that, it's a week in science from the Royal Institution of Australia, www.riaus.org.au. And then to round off the episode, Maynard Spooky Action, Part 2. Part 2 of Maynard's interview with Michael Marshall. And Michael Marshall was the guest of the Australian Skeptics at the recent convention. Part 2, Part 1 was last week, Part 2 this week. Now, before we get into the show, a quick update on the Sherry Tenpenny fiasco. We're not sure if she's coming or not now, coming out to Australia to give talks or to appear at talks. Most venues she was slated to appear at have cancelled the talk. This is a very good thing. And the flying monkeys have been screeching about free speech, and these people want to stop your freedom to listen and all the rest of it. Well, no, Sherry Tenpenny can spout her nonsense as much as she likes, but as I said on last week's show, we have the right here, or venues have the right here, not to have her appear and spout her nonsense. It's a very good thing. More updates as they come to hand over the next couple of weeks. And some news from our friends at the Canberra Skeptics. The Future of Science with Professor Brian Schmidt. Thursday, the 19th of February 2015 from 6 p.m. until 7:30 p.m. at Questacon, which is at the National Science and Technology Centre. And the admission is free. Not to be missed, an evening with Brian Schmidt. And you can find out more information and get your free tickets at canberraskeptics.org.au/2015Schmidt, or just go to canberraskeptics.org.au. Well, that's enough from me at the moment. I'm going to run downstairs and have an ice bucket full of ice, with ice for dessert. Whew. Yes, folks, it's that warm in Sydney, Australia. While I'm enjoying my ice, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone.
It's the Raw Skeptic Report with Heidi Robertson.
Hi everyone. Last week, Bangalow in northern New South Wales hosted the Starlight Festival. This festival ran for 3 days and included stalls, talks and quote-unquote sacred spaces for tarot readings, psychics, healers of various descriptions, workshops, yoga, chanting, Reiki, shamanic journeys, crystal healing, and more. I thought I'd pop in for a couple of hours to soak up the atmosphere and have a chat to some of the stallholders there. After listening to Michael Marshall's talk at the Australian National Skeptics Convention, He talked about politely interacting with people about their alternative beliefs in an effort to understand them. I wanted to try out his approach. I'd been to several mind, body, spirit events in Sydney and Brisbane over the years. However, that was during the time I subscribed to much of it myself. As I chatted to the various stallholders and listened to them talking about their products and services, I found myself internally questioning each claim and each comment they made that previously I would have accepted without question. I'd been under the illusion that if a person had a flashy-looking website, business cards, banners, etc., they must have something legitimate to offer. Yep, I know. A tad naive. I walked into the hall feeling like I had a big fat skeptic sign on my forehead. I felt paranoid. I had no idea how to now interact with people who had products and services I no longer believed in. Does one straight out say one is a skeptic? Does one pretend to be a true believer? I must say I've always valued honesty in myself and others, and I didn't want to falsely misrepresent myself, but I didn't want to immediately put people on the defensive either. So I had no clear idea of any specific tactic I was going to use. I sat in the middle of all the activity for a while, and after about 20 minutes I decided I just needed to jump in and see what happened. So I started some conversations. Based on how it was going, it became clear pretty quickly what approach might be suitable for the situation. Some, when I asked some probing, but always polite questions, still became quite defensive and wary. Others reacted to my sceptical questions with gusto and enthusiasm, and when I said that I may not agree with them, but was nevertheless interested in what they had to say, they thought it was bloody marvellous. Overwhelmingly, what I picked up from these conversations was a common thread: that science doesn't know everything. In some cases, they believe it should be out and out mocked and ridiculed for sticking to the scientific method, which does not allow for intuition and anecdotal evidence. Science is narrow-minded, too rigid. Science has a long way to go to catch up with what we, as spiritual beings, innately know. I also heard when I asked where the evidence was for a particular claim that I don't need evidence, it just works, followed sometimes by a direction to the testimonials page of that particular website. Some, while ridiculing science, then pointed to scientific evidence of their claims, which I found interesting. I found that the science they pointed to was dubious, to say the least. One I talked with was both a tarot card reader and rebirther. He was a genuinely lovely person and we got on well. He and his colleague also offered couples counselling, which included creative play, deep bonding work, frank and realistic approaches to sexual issues, and the cultivation of gratitude and acceptance. They also offered psychic readings and palm readings. I asked if I could have a psychic reading, but unfortunately for me, they were all booked out that day. Another stall offered personalised artworks depicting an image of the client's spiritual guide or guides, which could either be human or animal in form. An explanation on the website reads, I work with a spirit called Orpheus, who brings myself, the client, and the guide together for the drawing. Orpheus first made his presence known to me in a reading given at a spiritualist church on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. At the time, I had no idea who the lady was talking about, and at that point was not aware I was able to channel spirit guides through my drawing. Years later, I was preparing to go to my first platform appearance, and as I gazed at this image of Orpheus I had channeled for myself, I suddenly had the aha moment that this was the spirit that had come through to me 4 or 5 years prior. Thank you for your patience with me, Orpheus. I am honoured to help in your work, helping people to connect with their own spiritual guides. Namaste. I didn't get a chance to talk with that lady as she was busy with an artwork at the time. The next stall holders were also very interesting. The first thing I noticed were a variety of dowsing or water divining rods on the table. There was a banner behind them which read, "Biogenetic Balance. We balance your land, horse, and you." This kind of blew my mind, and I thought, well, I really wanted to know more. Firstly, they said, dowsing rods were not only for finding water. They explained that Mother Earth has positive and negative energy fields, and that they could advise on how to find those positive energy areas on a property for the family to inhabit by using the rods. I asked that, hypothetically, if two of them advised on this independently for a client, without knowing what the other was advising, would they expect to come up with the same result? There was a bit of an awkward silence where I thought this could go either way, and then one of them replied, "Good question." The answer finally emerged that it depended on how much experience the diviner had. A more experienced diviner would probably come up with the more accurate result. Out of the two of them, one said his gift had been passed down through generations and that he had never asked for it. The other was self-taught, so probably was not as accurate. They also said that science had confirmed that water divining worked. Masaru Emoto was presented as the irrefutable scientific proof that both homeopathy and water divining are legitimate. If you remember, Emoto was the Japanese author and entrepreneur that believed his experiments showed that human emotion could alter water's physical structure. I had to resist pointing them to James Randi and Dick Smith's experiments on the accuracy of water diviners. If you haven't seen it and you're interested, search for James Randi in Australia on YouTube. I'd never heard of biogenetic balance before. It's described in their brochure as energy healing and associated therapies in the most basic form as practiced throughout the ages. We are practitioners using energy to interpret and assist in aligning imbalance or maintaining optimum wellness via distance healing that works on a physical, mental, emotional and spiritual level. They provide a service involving them constructing towers which are located on the Earth's magnetic energy lines and act as a conductor by transmitting subtle energy from the outer atmosphere through to ground during the daylight hours, balancing the soil. At night, towers transmit to the atmosphere, balancing the air above to match the soil below. They claim that the benefits of this service include, but are not limited to, plant growth and harvest, the health of people and livestock, farm profitability, reductions in plant mortality, reductions in pest damage, no more need for chemical sprays, soil pH levels remaining neutral, and improved drainage. Perhaps the most extraordinary claim of these two was that they could heal a horse by way of administering chiropractic adjustments mentally anywhere nationally or internationally. How? I asked. They answered that the owner of the horse just needs to write down the name of the horse in their own handwriting on a piece of paper, thus giving permission for the healer to begin channeling the healing process. Another success story they related was about a client who had a cane toad problem, which is certainly not unusual for many of us here in Australia. The procedure they used went as follows. Step 1. They killed one cane toad on the property with Dettol, which is an over-the-counter antiseptic. Step 2. They let the dead cane toad dry out in the sun. Step 3. The ashes of the cane toad were put into a bowl made of something. I'm sorry I can't recall what that was, but it was something specific. And I confess at this point I was just trying to keep up. Step 4. The ashes in the bowl were put out in the paddock during the full moon. Result: the following day, all cane toads on the property were dead. I was asked how science could explain that. I must say, there was an air of triumph and a gotcha moment on their part. I replied that I could not explain it, that no one could be expected to unless they were there at the time and saw the whole process unfold. We parted on very good terms, and I said truthfully that I hoped to bump into them again sometime and that I appreciated their time in talking to me. So now to the part that went horribly wrong. All right, depending on how one looks at it, I suppose. It was a talk called Girl Talk for Women, What Your GP Isn't Telling You, What Really Matters When It Comes to Our Body, Food and Medicine. By the title, I didn't realise that this talk was going to be all about a woman's menstrual cycle, problems and natural treatments. That is, treatments provided by the speaker if you became her client. We took off our shoes and entered a teepee-type structure. There were 6 of us all together, which included the speaker. We sat on yoga mats and cushions, and the speaker asked me to pour the others each a cup of herbal tea. I did this, albeit somewhat awkwardly, crawling / bending / trying to retain some semblance of grace / as I reached across to each participant to hand them their tea. The space certainly had a nice feeling to it, but it was not designed for people like myself with lower back issues and people like myself being clumsy at the best of times. Without asking us our names and without further ado, we were each asked to relate what our menstrual cycles were like. She explained that she wanted the hour session to be interactive, with us all giving our stories and thoughts. I came to realise later that the thoughts were only welcome if we agreed with the speaker's opinions. So anyway, the others spoke first about their cycles, and they were very open and honest. Then it was my turn. Forgive me for the details, and believe me, I am sparing you most of the details here. But it is important to the story. I told them I had a contraceptive device put in, not for contraception as such, but to help with the difficulty I had each month with extensive pain and forced bed rest. I relayed how much it had helped me, so much, live a normal, active life again. I was met with a, well, that's a different perspective. Okay, thanks, by the speaker. It was then that I noticed she had one of these devices beside her in its package, alongside various packets of contraceptive pills. Realisation dawned on me that perhaps I was the epitome of everything a woman should not be doing for optimum female health. Whoops. She went on to say over the next 20 minutes or so how a woman's cycle was like the cycle of the moon and the plants. Something about a new moon and a new phase for women, and something about plants not flowering until they had strong roots. How we'd lost sight of this gift and were now being taught to think of it as a curse. How many of us have taken the easy way out with artificial contraceptive devices instead of embracing our natural cycles? She then passed around the same device I had in its packet, emphasising to me, "I'm not judging you." She explained how artificial contraception was giving us cancer. How could it be any other way, she said, since they secreted drugs directly into our most sensitive women's bits. It was obvious, she said to her, that this would cause changes in the cells that resulted in cancer. She talked about how she, as a skilled practitioner, could easily help people without them going on contraception, and turned to me and told me she could fix me with medicinal plants and herbs. I became more and more frustrated and upset as she talked about doctors taking the easy way out, that she liked doctors but only for emergency care and diagnostic tools. She said she had taken advantage of these services but would then often refuse any recommended treatment plan, preferring to self-treat. I've encountered similar comments before. So-called Western medicine is great for emergencies and diagnostics, but crap at everything else. I've come across it particularly with the topic of vaccination. Some are quite prepared to take their kids to an emergency department or a GP for emergency care and to trust the physicians to administer the treatment, but not trust them when it comes to vaccination. I don't understand this. Why trust doctors to do the best thing by your child in one situation, but believe that the same doctors are out to knowingly harm your child in a different situation? If the doctors are in the pocket of Big Pharma and you think that they secretly know that vaccines are harmful, then why on earth would you trust doctors with your child's life in a critical situation? So then she began to talk about her opinion of the dangers of the Gardasil vaccine. As you can imagine, me being involved in the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters Group, my blood pressure started to steadily climb. If you're not too familiar with the Gardasil vaccine, here's a brief background. Gardasil is now offered to pre-teens in Australia, both girls and boys, at about the age of 12 to 13. It's been remarkably successful in reducing human papillomavirus or HPV infection, which is a significant cause of cervical cancer and genital warts. The infection can also cause penile and anal cancers in males and some cancers of the head and neck. The incidence rates of presentations to clinics with genital warts have been reduced by about 61% since the vaccine has been introduced in Australia in the year 2007. Okay, so she began by talking about how many adverse effects and deaths there had been from the Gardasil vaccine. And it was at this point that I felt like I would burst a foo-foo valve if I didn't speak up. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard Tim Minchin saying, "In for a penny, in for a pound." So I interjected. I began by saying that the Gardasil vaccination initiative, since being introduced in Australia, was a fabulous public health initiative. I gave her some statistics about just how effective this vaccine had been thus far. She told me she disagreed, and that why would they have not just continued with pap smears without the need for the vaccine? I said this was not about opinion and disagreeing, but about the facts. When I mentioned the word science in relation to the studies, I was surprised to see her visibly recoil. It was a very visceral, a very telling reaction. This was not going well at all. So I tried addressing her comment about pap smears being good enough without the vaccine. I explained that pap smears picked up abnormalities in cells that were already present, whereas the vaccine prevented infection. That pap smears was still very important, as the vaccine does not cover all strains of HPV infection. She countered with the opinion that if girls were taught to look after their bodies and their mental and spiritual health, they would be protected. I countered with the fact that no amount of spiritual, mental or dietary self-help can protect one against sexually transmittable diseases. She came back with, "And now they've started giving boys this vaccine. Go figure. It makes no sense to me." Deep breaths. It was at this point I realised that I was talking with someone who had not even a basic understanding of the vaccine she was denigrating. I told her about the penile and anal cancers it also had a protective effect for, that it was important to give it to preteens who were not yet sexually active, as around 80% of people will be infected with HPV at some point in their lives once they become sexually active. She continued to shift the goalposts after each refutation I provided. She ignored my statements about pap smears and why boys needed the vaccine as well as girls. She was angry now, no doubt about it, and started talking about how everyone should be screened before receiving any vaccine to see if they were going to have an adverse reaction. At first, with this point, I thought she was talking about the small risk of anaphylaxis. But then she said, what if someone has weak kidneys and has a very strong vaccine given to them? I confess, at a loss at what to say to that statement. I wanted to say weak kidneys. What? I asked here where she was getting her evidence from. She was visibly flustered, and I was too. She replied, the same place your evidence is. She then accused me of being very strong in my opinions when all she was trying to do was to give her presentation. Well, she was probably right there. I became aware of how awkward the others in the group were, and I felt quite ashamed that I had let my emotions get in the way. I excused myself 15 minutes before her presentation was to end. I really felt like going back to the biogenetic balance people and asking them to measure the negative energy in the tent after I'd left. So, it's apparently completely different speaking with people face to face than it is over the internet. The dynamics are different. You don't have time to gather your thoughts and emotions when face to face. You can't look up the literature and have multiple different tabs open in front of you. You see the person in front of you, you perhaps have empathy for them and they you. On the other hand, there are also occurrences where there is no common ground reached, and the anger and frustration of both parties is palpable. Obviously, I still have a lot to learn. I don't know the best way to communicate with people who are immune, pardon the pun, to the best evidence that is there. How can you argue against someone who says that intuition and anecdotal evidence are more powerful to them than science? To me, it has been more than worthwhile to experience the range of reactions and emotions I felt during those few hours. I'm sure I'll do it again one day, but I'll make sure that next time I take along a like-minded friend for some emotional support. Thanks, folks. Find us, the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters, on Twitter at NRVaxSupporters, that's VAX, or on Facebook, or at our website nrbs.info. Thanks again. Till next time.
The Skeptic Zone is brought to you by Dr. Bob's Trivia Quiz. Visit drbobsquiz.wordpress.com and see if you can match wits with Dr. Bob.
Welcome to A Week in Science from RiAus, bringing you the science you need to know. How will the inhabitants of the most remote places on Earth fare under a changing climate? Not too well as we take a look at Antarctic wildlife and climate change. This is the tale of two penguins. One winner, one loser. This is an Adelie penguin. This is a Gentoo penguin. They are closely related and they both eat krill and the same kinds of fish. Over the past few decades, Adelie populations have been in rapid decline. During the same period, Gentoo populations have grown and they've extended their distribution further south. It looks like changes in sea ice due to climate change may be the key. Gentoos are adapted to subantarctic islands where they forage in ice-free areas. Adelie penguins spend their winters in the pack ice. So one penguin's loss is another bird's gain. Newborn Antarctic fur seals are also feeling the pinch due to climate change. During the first few months of life, Antarctic fur seal pups are especially vulnerable to cold conditions. Climate models may show an increase in temperature, but windier and wetter conditions mean pups will have to divert more energy into keeping warm and less into growing up. This change will dramatically affect fur seal pup survival rates. Added to this, it is likely that climate change will affect the availability of prey, placing even more stress on the vulnerable pups. And now, 4 fast facts about Antarctic wildlife and climate change. Antarctic whale species, such as minkies and humpbacks, could lose between 5 and 30% of their habitat as the oceans warm. Leopard seals face an uncertain future as large areas of sea ice on which they breed disappear. Krill, the Southern Ocean's main food source, are in decline, with losses of up to 80% in some areas in the past 30 years. And the annual migration of killer whales may be severely affected by the loss of ice flows. Normally, they would follow these around the polar seas. That's it for this A Week in Science. For more information on Antarctic wildlife and climate change, go to the RiAus website, riaus.org.au, follow us on Twitter at RiAus, and like us on Facebook. I'm Paul Willis, and we'll catch you back here next week.
QED 2015 with Matt Dillahunty, Lucy Green, Bruce Hood and more. Tickets for QED 2015 are currently on sale. To get your ticket to one of the highlights of the Skeptical Humanist calendar, visit qedcon.org/tickets. And what a lineup QED has this year, including, one of my favourites, Dr. Harriet Hall. I met Harriet years ago, actually, on an amazing adventure. The Skepdoc, she's called. Absolutely worth the price of admission alone, Dr. Harriet Hall. But of course, Professor Bruce Hood. He's a funny guy. He's great, always good value. All sorts of other people will be there. Brits will certainly know Mitch Ben, who's going to be there. And you can meet the one and only Michael Marshall, as well as all of the other Merseyside skeptics and the skeptics from Manchester. I had a great time at QED 2 years running. I was there. How lucky was I? It certainly is one of the better skeptical conventions anywhere in the world. Don't delay. Get your tickets at qedcon.org/tickets. Question, explore, discover. And this is being held in Manchester, of course, at the Palace Hotel. And that's where, that area at Trafford, that's where my great-grandmother came from. So I've got a sort of a little connection with that area. Again, QED, what a great conference it is. Kicking off on Friday, the 24th of April.
Here's Maynard's spooky action at a distance.
I couldn't be more excited because I'm with one of the biggest skeptics in the UK. We've got
Marsh.
From
the Merseyside Skeptic Society, from Skeptics with a K, from this and that, really, a bit everywhere.
Well, perhaps the most exciting thing on your show I've ever discovered is what I call the Great Big Book of Bullshit, and you brought it to Australia with you. Tell the listeners all about this.
Yeah, I love this. So this is the Giant Book of Fantastic Facts, and how it came about is there's Mike Hall, who's the presenter of Skeptics with a K.
Look, I'm going to put my reading glasses on for this because I expected it to be a bit more Bible-like and not as childlike. It's actually more childlike than I thought. I thought it was going to be a bit more, the Chariots of the Gods kind of thing, a bit more Eric von Daniken.
Oh, von Daniken. I tried to interview von Daniken. And we just didn't get a date for it. I'm gutted. He's still on my list.
Oh, you've got to get, because he's got the bling, he's got the rings, he likes to smoke the cigar, he always has a glass of fine scotch with him. He's top.
Yeah, I'd love to speak to him. But yeah, so it's a Giant Book of Facts. So it is a kid's book, and it's a kid's book that Mike Hall, the president of the Merseyside Skeptics, had when he was a kid, and he read it and he believed every word of this, because you're a kid, it's in a book, it's written down, it must be true.
Well, look, it starts with something on the front. It's a fact that hippos are heavier than humans. I'm sorry, but what's that all about?
Well, it's true. That is a fact. That is a mundane fact that's in there. But some of the other facts in here are not actual facts at all. In fact, one of them in here is...
Gee, I've got to say, they're pretty poor drawings too.
Oh, God, yeah, they're really, really awful. And then one of the stories in here was about a guy who he got out of bed one day and his feet didn't touch the ground, and he spent the entire day just floating around. And then at the end of the day, he landed again and he could never fly again. And that's complete nonsense.
What citation, please?
Well, obviously none of this has any kind of evidence behind it. So this is what Mike did. He remembered when we were doing in the middle of the show, he remembered this book as a kid, and he thought, hang on, this was nonsense. And he found a copy of it, so he bought a copy, and then what we do every week on the show is pick a story, and he'd read it out to us as it appears in the book, and we'd have to kind of guess whether we think it's true or false. Wow. And then he'd do the research to figure out if it was true or not.
Can you give us a sample here, one of your favourites?
Let me have a see. I mean, there was one in here.
Okay, this book has come all the way from England, everybody. This is real. This is literature royalty.
It is, absolutely. You know, it's come from... I brought it all the way with me. But there's a fantastic story. I wonder if I can find it, which was about a guy during the Second World War who was flying a plane, and he had to bail out of the plane.
I saw a drawing of someone with their hands up earlier. I think there's a drawing got someone with their hands up?
Well, he was flying a plane at the time, and he had to bail out of the plane because it had been shot down. And so he didn't have a parachute or anything like that. So he just jumped out. And he was like, 40,000 feet in the air or 20,000 feet in the air or whatever. And he fell. And because he landed in some snow, it cushioned his fall. And he's totally survived. He was absolutely fine. And we thought, this has got to be nonsense. You can't jump out of a plane and survive. But when Mike looked into it, it was absolutely true.
Wow.
And it was even more interesting that the guy who, he did land in a massive bale of snow. His fall was broken by some trees. He jumped out of a plane at the highest kind of height that he'd been flying as a fighter pilot. And then he was captured, and he went into a concentration camp for a while, a prisoner of war camp. And he was part of the film that he was part of the actual escape that The Great Escape was based on.
Okay.
But he didn't try and escape because he was claustrophobic and couldn't go through the tunnels.
So he's okay taking a dive from 40,000 feet without a parachute, but going in a tunnel? No way.
Yeah, exactly. And this turned out to be true, And this is the really weird thing about this book, is that you've got such a range of complete nonsense in there, but every now and again you'll just find a story that's absolutely true. And there's another story in here about the old, very old man who was. It said about how he was.
Who played a lot of bingo and drank port.
Well, apparently he'd lived for like 200 years, and then one day he died, and they autopsied him, and they found nothing weird. And we don't, it clearly wasn't true. But what we think actually happened was he had a son with the same name as him, and somewhere down the line the records got confused, and it made him look like he was incredibly old. But it's a well-known story apparently.
There's also some great a few typos in there as well.
Yeah, well, in part typos, and just the glaring factual inaccuracies are amazing. At one point they talk about the theory of relativity, which was invented by Gilbert Einstein. So how do you not fact check that of all things? That's the easiest thing in the world to find out. Who believes he's called Gilbert? Yeah, it's a remarkable tome. You can touch the edges of the hems of the book.
I'm just touching the page, the Battle of the Ghosts. Now, is this some biblical story? What's all this about? Farm workers on their way home from work from Banbury to Kinnerton. Is that a particular specially place or not? Is that a ghosty place?
I don't know. It's in Warwickshire, and they're saying that they saw and heard an action replay of the Battle of Edge Hill, which was fought 3 months earlier, and how they saw this and they were sort of terrified, and the whole thing was apparently ghosts that were playing it out. It says their report is probably the only ghost story accepted in the documents of the Public Records of Office as authentic. I don't know if this one's true. I don't think we ever got to this one on the show.
Wow. Well, that's page 180, and that falls squarely in the hearsay category, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is kind of so many of these stories. I think a lot of the stories that we didn't get to, it was simply that we couldn't. There wasn't enough in there to figure out whether it was true or not. But then you've got other stuff like the story of Tycho Brahe and how he had a golden nose, and it's kind of in real life. Yeah, I don't think it was gold.
Just because he did a lot of Charlie. Is that the reason why?
I don't know. I can't remember why he lost his nose. Actually,
he could never keep money in the bank account.
Yeah, that was it. He lost his nose in a duel. It was sliced off by a slash from an opponent's sword. This is what the story was.
Yeah, and it also says he was usually withdrawing $200 from the ATM late at night on a Friday and Saturday, and that's why he was known for the golden nose.
Yeah, exactly. But it turns out, this was a real story. Tycho Brahe, he's a really famous astronomer. I believe his nose wasn't gold. I think it was like a copper mix. And one of the theories about how he died was that it was poisoning, heavy metal poisoning from the nose. Because apparently he sat at dinner, and apparently he was too polite to get up to go to the bathroom, and he died when that kind of killed him. That he sat there for far too long and didn't excrete when he should have done, and that killed him.
A guy with a really obvious golden nose not wanting to go up and have a slash, that's very odd behaviour.
Well, he wouldn't want to stand out, I suppose. You wouldn't want to stand out to anyone with the golden nose.
So is this book being completely exhausted on Skeptics with a K?
I think so, and it's a real shame because it was a fun segment. But
now, I heard rumours there was a follow-up book you guys got.
Yeah, there was another giant book of fantastic facts.
Well, it wasn't just the same one with a different cover, was it?
No, it wasn't. It was the next version, but it was all true. It was really disappointing. There was no nonsense in there.
So they might have got a fact checker for the second one.
Well, apparently it was written by, there's like 3 or 4 guys who wrote the original, and one of them left, so the follow-up didn't have one of those guys in there.
And he was obviously the guy making up the shit.
Yeah, we assume that he was just the guy who was just the bullshit merchant. And I don't know whether he was doing it on purpose.
He was drunk.
Well, I like the idea that he was like, God, you'll never guess what I've got them to believe this time. Never guess what I managed to slide into the book. Yeah. But,
wow. Look, I'm going to take a photo of you so people know that this book is in the country, even just for a limited limited time. Any trouble getting this through customs at all? They said, excuse me, sir, you're carrying too much bullshit with you.
Well, they did think it was contraband because obviously any kind of biological material is banned coming into Australia. This constitutes bullshit, I think. So I think it had enough elements of bull left in it that it set off the scanners.
Oh, of course. It's actually it's a legal obligation of myself to ask, what do you think of Australia so far? We always have to ask people that.
I'm really enjoying it. Not that I thought I wouldn't, but yeah, I mean, Sydney's a fantastic city. And I've said
you were complaining you couldn't get pints last night at the bar.
That is true. I managed to convince someone to give me a pint, but every time I asked, he was giving me a schooner, and I don't like this kind of schooner creep because it's happening in the UK, this kind of creep towards using schooners. I don't trust that. I think it's just a way for trendy bars to sell you less than a pint for more than a pint would cost.
Yeah, how much less than a pint is it?
I think it's about 2/3.
Ooh,
yeah, so that's significant, really. Yeah, right. But no, I'm really enjoying it.
And what about our beer here? Of course, that everyone makes a big deal about our beer being cold and our beer being very different to English beer. Of course, your favourite beer is what?
I don't know. I'll drink pretty much anything. This is a terrible thing. Any kind of beers, that I think I'll drink. I like a pint of Guinness. I just started drinking that when I was a kid, when I was like 17, 18, just to try and put some weight on because I was incredibly thin at the time.
Well, you're still pretty thin. It's a solid drink.
Yeah, no, it's good. Unfortunately, I'm going to Dublin to speak for the Irish Skeptics in February next year, so I'll be definitely sampling plenty of the Guinness there. But no, I've enjoyed the Aussie beer, and the company's great. I think I've long said that the Aussie Skeptics are probably my favourite group in the world because I think we've got it's like a kindred group to what we do with Merseyside and with QED, the conference that I run. Because I think we've all got the same kind of spirit of let's all just muck in. We're all in this together, We're all sharing this value system, this idea of kind of challenging stuff and questioning stuff and looking for evidence and trying to help people outside of that kind of community. So yeah, the Aussie Skeptics I love.
Look, the critics that I meet locally complain, you guys just go after the low-hanging fruit like homeopathy and psychics. Why don't you go after the big ones like the Catholic Church, Islam, Scientology? What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, this comes up when I do lectures on this kind of stuff. And there's a couple of things. First of all, I was saying that I can stop a chunky sports bracelet company selling dodgy bracelets. I can't bring down the Catholic Church. I think it's very... I've got a lot of faith in my ability, but not that much faith.
Even Henry VIII had a go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, look what happened there.
Didn't go well.
And I think the other side of it is there's a lot of people who won't believe in homeopathy. They won't have heard of it before, so you can first of all tell them what it is, and that will that will protect them against falling for it. But also,
and I, like a lot of people, thought it was something to do with herbal preparations. I thought there was actually an active ingredient.
Yeah, loads of people are really surprised when you tell them that there's nothing in homeopathy. It's just sugar, it's just water, there's nothing at all. People can't believe that that's true, and they can't believe then that your pharmacies will sell it like it's real medicine. So I think you protect them against ideas that they hadn't heard of, so that they're not going to fall for it the next time they hear it or the first time they hear it. But also I think you can demonstrate the flaws in beliefs by using these obvious examples. So if you arm people with the idea of how to spot cold reading when it's been done, so you can tell whether someone's actually talking the dead or just kind of picking details out that you're making fit, and the methodology in challenging psychics is the same methodology in challenging Scientology, in challenging the way that the media presents stuff, in challenging the way that economic systems might be structured. And people complain to me that you don't have a look at economy and things like that. And it's like, well, you can bring people to the method and demonstrate that method, and then where people take that method, go on and do it. And when people say to me, why aren't you spending all your time looking at this, this and this, I always say, I agree that those are worthwhile places to look. More power to you. You clearly care about those issues a lot. Off you go. It's the same tool set. I think what I like to try and do with the talk that I give is to demonstrate to people that it doesn't take lists of PhDs behind you to be able to challenge this stuff. It just takes an awareness of the basic structure and a willingness to be out there, to be active, to be kind of energetic and enthusiastic. And I think you can get a long way on that.
Bit of a controversial question here. Has the UK skeptical scene matured as it has in the US, and there's been a bit of splintering of the movement and people going, that person isn't what I thought they were, the whole movement's crap? Has there been anything like that going on?
I don't think there has. I don't think there has in the UK, and I think part of that reason is because we didn't spring up the way that the American movement sort of did. And the American movement is kind of the father of all of the different movements around the world. But those started really where there was a charismatic, incredibly talented individual like your James Randi kind of figure who started a group, and it was kind of set up that way, is that this is a personal crusade almost. And it was phenomenally successful for that. But I think necessarily that's a kind of a top-down structure, is that you have someone at the top. And the moment you have someone on the top stood on a pedestal and you have a couple of those people, one of them's going to get knocked off.
Because they're just people.
Yeah, people are people. People are flawed, and it's very it's very disconcerting when I see our community, which kind of prides itself on its ability to kind of challenge authority and challenge these challenge monolithic figures, then having a monolithic figure of their own. I think that's always something we should try and avoid. But luckily in the UK, I think we sprung up organically. You can start a skeptical group in the UK, and it's not that you have to kind of ask someone for permission and license their name and you just start one. If you want a skeptics in your pub, start one and see who comes and tell people about it and ask people who've got other groups what works for them. And I think that's kind of what's worked with the UK scene, is that we don't have these big monolithic figures really who are really involved in skepticism. We've got people like Richard Dawkins, but I don't think he's really involved in skepticism. I wouldn't call him a skeptical
And how much of the time do you think some of the stuff he says he's just stirring the pot? Do you think he's a guy who just likes to stir the pot sometimes just for the sake of it?
I always try and avoid speculating over what people think, whether they're people on our side or people on the side of psychics, things like that. It's what people kind of forget very easily is that everybody is just human. They might have great ideas in one area, they might be completely flawed in another. And I think for us to assume that because someone is great writing about atheism or great writing about evolution and genetics, things like that they're perfect at everything, I think that all that does is set us up for a fall. And the funny thing is when you see I always try and avoid saying believers because I don't like this kind of them and us mentality, this kind of intellectual apartheid. Is like
and I think that's a good thing to set up too, because as soon as you do that, you're building a wall.
Yeah, and I want there to be as few walls as possible. So I think I much rather would look for where we have lines of common ground with people who subscribe to beliefs that we don't, to try and say, well, you don't believe in Bigfoot. Well, why not? And let's explore why we don't believe in Bigfoot, and maybe we can look at that elsewhere.
This is one of the other podcasts that the Merseyside do, don't you? It's Incredulous, is that it?
No,
sorry.
Complete opposite. Incredulous is like a very ribald comedy show, but no, Be Reasonable is a show that I do, a monthly show where I find someone who believes in something that I don't, and we just try and explore the boundaries of their belief. And because we're doing it, I'm a big proponent of the idea that to have someone, to question someone about their belief, you can't do it by saying you're an idiot, why do you believe this, you're gullible, what about this, and be aggressive, because the moment you're aggressive to someone, their defences go up and they just go through the down pat defensive statements that they've been using every time anyone's ever questioned them. But if you say to them, I'm really interested in what you believe, could you tell me about it? People love talking about what they believe. They love telling people about their belief systems and why they really believe it. And you can then ask gentle, penetrative questions, but you're doing it in a very polite, very respectful way. And instead of being stopped at the gates, you get into the middle of the maze, and you can walk people around the maze of their own beliefs. And sometimes you'll take a turn that they've never taken before, and you can get them to a point where they think, I've never thought that, I've never thought about that aspect before. And maybe those people you can kind of get to question what they believe.
And now what's that podcast we should look out for?
That's Be Reasonable. Yeah, and you can find that on our website, merseysideskeptics.org.uk, or it's on iTunes or Stitcher, so yeah.
Look, let's get on to the serious stuff. I've got issues with Peter Capaldi as the Doctor.
You know what? I'm the worst person in the world to talk to about this. I have never seen an episode of Doctor Who in my life.
Oh,
never seen a full episode.
And now, is that because you just avoided it, or you just don't care for it?
Well, I think I'm a freak in the skeptical community for a couple of reasons. One, I don't really get on board with sci-fi too much. I'm not a sci-fi fan at all. Sci-fi fantasy doesn't do an awful lot for me. I love literature. I love exploring ideas, but I've never been grabbed by.
You're someone who'd rather watch The Bill, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But then as well, the other reason I'm a freak in the
but The Bill is internally consistent.
Exactly, and I don't mind something that sets up the rules at the start and then never breaks those rules. Right, so when you see something, the first series of like Heroes or something, where I was like, right, 10 minutes in, there are people with magical powers. Yeah. From there, we're done. We're not going to introduce anything else weird. We're not going to start bending time or anything like that. Well, we are, but someone can do that very early on. I'm fine with stuff that's internally consistent that way. It's when you can then just pluck something and say, well, this episode we're going to talk about this over here, which we never introduced before. It didn't exist before, but now it's kind of part. Yeah, it kind of lose me a little bit. Okay. But I think the other reason I'm a freak in the skeptic community, and this is going to be shocking, I think, I'm not that bothered about science. I think it's incredibly vital in our community, in the world. I think it has hugely beneficial aspects, and the people who are doing that work, all power to them. I am incredibly appreciative of the fact that people are out there making these great advancements. But I'm not in skepticism for pushing the boundaries. I'm in skepticism for defending the territories. The stuff that we already know is true. Okay. Where is that eroding from people who are holding it? I'm in skepticism for the weird beliefs. I love having a conversation with someone I totally disagree with about something that I've never.
It's fascinating. I cop that a lot because I'll sit down and talk to people about that, and most skeptics go, but how could you possibly talk to that person about that without interjecting and arguing with them? it can be done, can't it?
Yeah, and I think, if I want a conversation where someone agrees with me, I can fill a room full of people with that. I've got friends for that. But what I want to do is to try and learn about the boundaries of my own belief and the boundaries of their belief and what belief means and why people construct these beliefs. So I want to talk to someone who I completely disagree with. And there's a quote that I always kind of think about in those situations, which is from William Blake in the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, fantastic book from like 15th, 16th century, something like that, where he says, without opposition, there's no progression. So without sort of finding ways to challenge what you're thinking, you're never going to push forward. And I think that's what I really want to look at, is kind of where's the opposite of what I think, and what can I learn about why people believe that, and then how that arms me for being better at challenging that when I find it elsewhere. But also, it just gives me that question of, well, am I right? This person's got a totally different perspective. I'm now going to challenge whether I think I'm right or not. Whereas if I'm just talking to someone who agrees with me, they're going to tell me all the things that I already know. That we're just going to walk down the logical pathways that I've walked down a million times in my own head, and we're just going to cement that path. But we're not going to start exploring the undergrowth. And I think that's what I really want to do.
Wow. Okay. Look, thank you very much for your time. A bit disappointing I haven't got my answer on Doctor Who there, but that's okay. But I've worn a Doctor Who prop.
You have. And you know what? If you ever get to see Mike in person, ask him that question and he'll give you half an hour of analysing every single Doctor, because Mike is the Doctor Who nerd. Mike is the one who can recite whole episodes line by line. He's absolutely obsessed by it. Yeah, so you've asked the wrong Mike, I think.
All right, well, next time I'm having a Bill Mega Watch. I've got the 95 DVD box set. I'll invite you over.
I'll be there.
In fact, last night, it was the perfect antidote for the Skeptics opening last night. I went home and I had a bourbon and JFK conspiracy party at my place on my own.
Oh, wow. JFK conspiracy. I'd love to speak to someone who's a conspiracist for JFK. That's a fascinating one.
Oh, look, you need to talk to my mate Jay Katz. Richard's spoken to him, haven't you? You had quite a discussion about the partial palm print on the rifle, I believe.
I certainly did, but let's not go there.
Yeah, let's not get there. Okay. And look, get up there and give a talk there, and I'm standing ovation. You'll get one, and you'll get free drinks later.
Excellent. I'll have a one-man standing ovation. At least I can bank on Maynard standing. That's all all I care about.
And thank you for bringing the big book of bullshit to Australia.
It's been a pleasure.
Podcast Science is an award-winning weekly science show in French hosted by a bunch of crazy enthusiasts. We are convinced that the greatest ideas in science are quite easy to grasp as long as they're presented with passion, using a vocabulary common to all curious minds, whatever their academic background, if any. You don't understand French yet? Well, it's never too late. All our stories have a written transcript on the website, and people from all around the world are using our content to learn Molière's language. Our topics range from 0 to infinity, from evolution to artificial life, from electromagnetism to the science of introverts. We just love mathematics, science, critical thinking. So do you? Want to join? You can subscribe to the podcast for free from our website, podcastscience.fm, that's in one word. You also find us on iTunes and SoundCloud. See you soon, hopefully. Hâte de vous accueillir. À bientôt sur Podcast Science.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone. Wow. I think I'm going to have a nice ice drink after this show is finished. And if you enjoy listening to the Skeptic Zone and you want to show your appreciation, the best way to do that is to become a subscriber. Less than $1 a week via PayPal at www.skepticzone.tv, or you can have the option there to contribute more a week if you wish. And your money goes to help make the show possible. And indeed, I've just purchased a lovely new Zoom microphone for our new reporter, Heidi Robertson. So that's in the post on a way to do, and that's only because people like you subscribe to the show via PayPal, and that's the only reason I can afford to do things like give my reporters lovely new microphones. So the upcoming Raw Skeptic Reports, I'm sure, will sound quite a bit better. The content is brilliant anyway, but the audio quality will now sound a little bit better. Coming up on the Skeptic Zone, more of Maynard, reporting from the Australian Skeptics National Convention. I'm hoping to catch up with people like Jeannie Scott in the Bay Area and San Francisco Bay Area. More Joe Alabaster in the coming weeks, more Heidi, lots more of everything. But until next week, this is Richard Saunders, signing off from Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for comments, contacts, and extra video reports.
Who would we have on the phone but none other than Carl Kruszelniski? Good morning, Carl.
Good morning, it's the young and lovely Carl talking to the young and lovely Maynard.
Hey, go easy with the compliments there, Carl. Look, earlier this week, I visited a friend of mine, and she is a dentist. And she said, try some of this. And I don't like to mention any names or anything. And I was breathing this, funny gas in a medical cylinder. And, I was having too much fun and the bells were ringing in the head in no time. This was a very fun gas. Now, would this be the well-known nitrous oxide?
Yeah, it's traditionally beloved by dentists who have access to it.
Right, now, is it okay if I go over to her place fairly often and breathe this nitrous oxide? Am I going to die or what?
No, your spine will collapse.
Right, that's pretty well much the same thing, isn't it?
No, what happens is that after about 20 or 30 years of getting stuck into the nitrous, they used to think that originally that nitrous was, in fact, a perfectly benign, harmless gas. It came into your system, dissolved in the blood, dissolved out again immediately, went out through your lungs, gone, no side effects, no dissolving in fat. They thought it was a wonderful drug. And then they finally came across a few dentists who'd been taking this stuff for 20, 30, 40 years every day after dinner, and they found that they had collapsed vertebrae.
So all these dentists were falling down on the floor without notice.
And what's happened is that the sides of the vertebrae, which are normally parallel to each other, collapse, and they end up with a wedge-shaped vertebra. And sometimes they can just collapse totally. This can cause great pain if it happens to squeeze a few of the nerves. And it certainly leads to immobility of the spine, as flexible as it used to be, and as well as that, you're just sort of staring down at the ground all the time.
This is can be self-induced by certain dentists. So if we see a humpbacked dentist, we go up to him and say, I know what you've been up to.
No, you should say, if I suspect what you've been doing. You can't be sure. Knowledge is not absolute apart from religious knowledge.
I should keep seeing my dentist friend and breathe as much nitrous oxide as I like.
If you want to have your spine collapse and you want to lose a few centimetres in height, that'd be the way to go.